So, hey, Richard, wonderful to have you on this call today. This is your signature impact consultation. We call it that because essentially I believe that everybody has specific strengths that are built into their character. And that's the kind of the signature thing that you bring to the world. Everybody has certain archetypal characters that come to the fore more regularly. They're kind of dominant ones. And that's what I call the signature impact. But this session goes deeper than you've been able to see previously because we're going to look at the range of archetypes, not just the two strongest. So the power profile that you've had a chance to see will elevate those two strongest characters and will explain a lot about why you do things the way that you do. Uh, and this is now the chance on this consultation to go deeper into your full range of archetypes and explain a lot more about the other characters, some of whom you may find are just a little bit weaker than the two dominant ones. Some may be some way further back, and it will really explain a lot about why things are being why you're approaching things the way that you are in life. And that may be working for you. It may at times be working against you. And that's the sort of thing that we need to explain. So we're diagnosing and we are discovering there's this hidden code to your unique personal impact to start with on life, wherever you turn up. The
Okay.
key factors that are potentially still holding you back or just, dampening your performance in certain areas, that may come up too. And this will give you a sense of how to show up in order to achieve the purpose that's in your heart and succeed with that. I mean, to some people, it's the key to them becoming profitable in a certain area and by play because they haven't previously played to their strengths. And this it is a sort of strengths indicator. There are other strengths indicators out there, but this is one unique way of elevating those strengths, which I find very often is the key to people being a success in whatever line of business or life they're dealing with. It can be a relationship thing, it can be a business thing, it can be all sorts. But that's where we are. So for some people, I'll say this profile will show you where you're strong and where you're stuck,
Yeah,
because some
sure.
people do get stuck in different ways, and we all do. So look, tell me just a little bit about you in 30 seconds, if that's possible.
Sure.
Where you're at, and if there's anything particularly on your mind as we are looking at this session together.
Yeah, perfect. So, my name's Richard. I currently work for Microsoft as a service management consultant. Um, I have an interesting, I contribute to a lot of industry best practice publications. I have an interesting role in that I work for a technology company, but I'm not necessarily a technologist. So I'm often put in very interesting meetings and discussions where I'm having to, let's say, put my vulnerabilities sort of aside and just jump in and get my hands dirty on things I don't fully understand many of the times.
Mm-hmm.
This is can obviously be a very anxious experience for a lot of people. Sometimes I feel anxious in those scenarios. And what I found really interesting about your archetypes and approaches is being able to call on different sort of characteristics in my personality to be able to help me cope better in those situations, to help give me more confidence in certain situations. And I mean, when I saw the results, they were completely in alignment with what I felt I was like. So in the industry that I work in, very often we've got sessions where people are looking for really out there kind of innovative solutions to problems. But because my focus is predominantly on the on best practice and on looking at things thoroughly, and being very much to the book, so to speak, I battle to become creative in that space. So I found it really
Right.
interesting,
Yeah.
the fact that I could be a lot more creative by calling on certain archetypes in my personality traits, etc., to be able to start in those situations becoming a lot more effective at what I do, and providing more unique ideas and moving away from my sort of mindset that I usually go to work with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. And we all just we show up as we are. Of course, the environment will demand certain responses from us, and we can grow to that. and that's useful, and that's why we put people in challenging situations to sort of, to draw the best out of them. But we'll
Sure.
also find that we have natural strengths, and that's what we tend to bring, unless that environment is demanding something different. And there's a point at which the environment will it'll definitely be helping us to grow, but there's also that feeling of discomfort as it demands something from us that we're not
Absolutely.
always naturally able to bring.
Absolutely.
But we can go there and we can do things just like going to the gym and having a personal trainer. You go to the gym and you do stuff, you'll probably end up doing those exercises that you know you can do and you feel comfortable doing. You've got a certain degree of confidence in it. You're unlikely to do those exercises unless you're really pushing yourself and you're able to analyze your weaknesses. That you would not tend to do those exercises that you suck at. so and that's the way that it is with a lot of these challenges. We tend to get those jobs that play to our strengths, and I believe that is the best way to go. And yet, in order to strengthen and become more rounded in character, which is a key for leadership in particular, that we can take on particular exercises. There are exercises that Team Me encompasses that will show people how to awaken and then strengthen character traits of other archetypes that may not be so strong in us. I have to do this particularly when it comes to finances and things. I literally have to put the sage hat on, and I need to work myself to that place, then approach the finances. Otherwise, those other traits are stronger in me, and they will just drift and they will flow, and they won't get the finances done. So that's my key weakness I have to work on. So for me, run back to the sage. But for you, your power profile shows what? Do you remember what came through strongly on the power profile?
So Sage was the top one, followed very closely by Sovereign. And I think, interestingly enough, the scenario that you're giving, where I find challenge being so strong in the Sage sense, is I would, for example, approach my finances, but I'd start building fancy dashboards, and I'd start looking at, how to best approach it. And, if we look at this data and that data, from my monthly spend, how do I get insights into my future spend? And I end up not getting the data of the finances done because I'm too busy trying to figure out the best way to do things or the best way to draw reports. So that is the typical challenge of being a sage as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and again, the sage, you'll have tendencies. The sages are good with the detail. Now, for some people, it's more of the creative detail because they're that sort of sage. For other people,
Yeah,
it's
sure.
the harsh numbers, and they just want to go back to that. But it is detail. It's having the ability to look at the detail, analyze, extrapolate, and come to conclusions based on evidence. Whereas
Right.
the mystic, for example, they don't start with evidence. They start with imagination, and imagination can go anywhere. Like there's no limits to imagination. Let's
They've
just
got very low
imagine.
bank accounts.
They tend to have low bank accounts, and they
Yeah.
tend to have heads in the clouds. It's actually
Sure.
it. They are head in the cloud people, and the sages look at them and they just go. They shake their heads because that's where all the thinking goes on, and they just go, "Oh, for goodness sake, guys, when will you deal with reality?" And so there's this disdain for some of those things. The warriors also think the mystics are woolly because they deal with concepts and ideas all the time instead of action. So
Right.
if
Yeah.
in their purest form. So look, you've got an interesting profile there. Sage was definitely the strongest. Sovereign was not far behind. So quite simply, you're a guy who when you come into a meeting, it's like, show me the facts. What have we got? What are we dealing with? Show me the numbers. Show me what's real. Let's get the reality check. And then you say,
Absolutely.
right, how do we bring about control and order? How do we structure this thing and order this thing so that we're moving in the right direction?
Absolutely.
The sovereign has that sense of vision. So that's immediately what the power profile alone tells me how you go about things. And when you go into a meeting or a new situation, I know that those will be the top two drivers. But in a nutshell, that's it. The interesting thing then is how the rest of the profile plays out. So let's look at that now. We've got
Sure.
the lover is actually the next one. So you're swinging here from strong left brain characters, the sage and the sovereign, and then swinging over to a nice balance there with the lover character. And the lover's basically saying, okay, guys, but we're a team. let's as a team make sure we're all good and we're
Yeah,
all
exactly.
together in this and moving forward. So that's your next driver. And very soon after that, because all of these characters are over 6, in fact your sage is over 9, but all of these characters are over 6, you then go swinging back into that left brain thing. And this is a fluid process, but I've never yet found somebody say this isn't the way I think. But when
Sure.
I play back to them that this is literally the order in which the thoughts come, that after that desire for the team, for unity, for harmony, for working together, and making sure everyone's good, then in comes, right, what do we need to do? The warrior kicks in at that point, and it's a case of, well, this isn't real unless we're doing something. So let's do. The
Absolutely.
interesting thing then is that, just to throw in the last two, so back onto the right brain types, which as an average are lower than your left brain, distinctly lower. You've then got the mystic. So you've got some imagination. You've got the ability to go there, but it's not a driver. It's not who first turns up. Yeah.
Sure.
So you don't come in like Gandalf. You come in more
Exactly
like,
right.
yeah, you come in more like, oh my word, who I'm just keep to the Lord of the Rings types, elven lord, who's very, I mean, they've got mystical traits to the elves, but they're also very specific and wise about stuff as well. So
Sure.
there's an interesting mix of sage and mystic going on in the elves there. But yeah, but you're not coming in like Gandalf, who wants to wave his staff around and start speaking into the ether for things to change. It's like, well, okay, but you do have imagination. You do have some of that. You're over 5 with the mystic. It's not like you're a 3 or a 2 and it's just something you really can't get to grips with. You do have the
Sure.
ability to say, actually, guys, okay, I see an opportunity to transform this situation. I can imagine in my mind where this could go. So the others are the dominant drivers, but the mystic is there. It's not like you've got nothing to play with. You really
Right.
do. It's over 5. It's a healthy amount of the mystic in there. You can dream of something bigger and better. It's just that with a sage being over 9, that's strong. That's really
Absolutely.
strong. So that's
Yeah.
definitely dominant. A load of people will come back with profiles where nothing is over a 7.
That's so right. Okay.
Nothing over there's a few I come across where nothing's over a 5, and I'm listening there going, okay, how much impact do you feel you've had on where you've been? It's like, well, I don't know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
just drift along and do things here and it's like they're not really achieving much at all. I'm actually not dissing that. There's a point at which there's just being there, but I'd love it. At least the lover should be strong, where even if you're not Mr. Super Success in the finance or business world, at least you're supporting people and being there for them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? It's like, that's what I'd like to see. And I think we should all press on for maturity in that way. Okay, last of all, now this is interesting because I think this is your professional role here, that you've kind of come at it from I'm going to fill this in as a professional, because the jest is only just hovering over a 3. And yet I've seen you in social situations, and that jest is at least a 6 in social situations, maybe even 7 or 8 at times.
I found that as well. Yeah. I also found it interesting, and I don't know when I did it, being at work, perhaps. I don't know what state of mind I was in, and it would be interesting really to try and shift my mind into a social setting and attempt it again to see what the character would look like in that case. But I think very interesting for me is that these can shift based on situation, which again reiterates the fact that you could call on these different archetypes when needed. I think that's just proof again that if I need a jester in a social situation, I know that that's going to be more likely to be more effective and bring it to the table first. I mean, no one likes a smart ass coming into a conversation when you first meet them. So down with the sage, up with the jokes kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's a way of that's your way of making connection, and the lover being the third, in your professional world, the lover is strong. And I would
probably still be strong, yeah.
It's still going to, I think it would suspect that in the social personal situation, it's still pretty strong. It's actually your way of making connection does involve quite a bit of the jester. So I've seen that in action. And so that's why. Now, I often will do a coaching scenario, and I will get people to fill in the profile and say, look, put yourself in the work situation. Imagine yourself at the desk, the boss is there, the other people are there. No, all this is going on. Now complete your profile. And then I'll say, okay, It's Friday night. All your work's done. You've got a few things lined up for the next week, but it's not like it's bugging you. You've got the free weekend to be completely yourself. Well-deserved break. Now complete that. You're thinking of your family, your friends, the activities you've got planned, and now complete the profile. And we compare the two. And the question very often then is we look at where the biggest gaps are between
Hmm.
what is demanded from them at work. And they do show up at work with that. It's not like they're faking it. They can do it because the environment demands it and they're capable and they do it. But then when you compare it to the personal profile, if I see a gap of more than 3 between the two profiles, so the warrior might be a 7 at work and it's a 4 or 3 in personal situation, I will question, how comfortable do you feel at work? I mean, are you really happy there? Are you okay with that? Some
Oh,
people are. Ski
yeah.
instructors doing the skiing job and then drinking Glühwein and chilling with their friends afterwards. They've got they hate. It's okay that there's a big discrepancy between the two, because what is demanded in both situations is very different. And actually, their way of regenerating themselves to get back on the slopes and be safety minded and specific in their teaching and get everything right. And it's because life and death is what they're facing on the ski slopes as they instruct new wannabe skiers, etc. And their way of actually preparing for that is to completely let their hair down outside of their work situation, and they're happy with that, to and fro, zig and
Mm.
zag, etc. But there are some people who say, no, in truth, what you've done is highlight something. I'm not really happy. I show up, I do that, but it's not really me. I feel like I'm being a bit of an imposter, to be honest. And so that's an interesting conversation to be had there. And there are times then, there are some techniques of bringing the two worlds together that are incredibly powerful. Something I have to be there present with somebody to go through. But you can actually, is your mind has partitioned these two things, you can actually bring the strength from one into the other and literally bring them
Right.
together. It's a very,
Interesting.
very powerful technique. But in your situation, this is what we have. So your particular challenge you were highlighting earlier is around the mystic.
There's two distinct challenges I have. The one is the situation I gave before, where I'm expected to come up with unique ideas and solutions to problems. The other one is that I'm in a very large team and I have to be viewed as a thought leader um, against a very large sum of thought leaders. So um, I suppose it leaves me. My sage strength is as strong as it is. In a room full of other sages, how do you stand out?
Mm, right, interesting
In its
point.
simple term, And I think, given the fact that I've got such strong sovereignty there, I by nature want to get control and sort of drive things, but it's difficult to do that amidst a bunch of other sages that are also trying to be thought leaders, etc. So, standing out from that crowd, and I suspect it's probably got to do with the two problems are probably interrelated, because I suppose the solution to that would be thinking more outside of the box and around the sort of the norm, if that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. And thinking outside the box it's definitely a right brain tendency. The
Absolutely, yeah.
lovers tend to be the jesters are the first to throw the rule book out and break the rules. Lovers are quite good at bending the rules. The mystics transcend any rules, and they just say, "Yeah, I know what you're saying, but I'm going well above and beyond." And that's where they get into some, it's almost a different realm of thinking, a completely different way of seeing things, a totally different perspective. They're not basing it upon evidence. They're saying, "What if?" Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Um, so that's really interesting. Now, when you're talking about the sovereign, are you saying that in your work situation, you actually do have a sense of delegated authority to move the team forward, or are you,
None.
you're just one of many people and you're all pretty much peers in this
Yeah,
scenario? Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So this is where now sovereigns work best when there is a delegated authority. But if the sovereign is strong, the sovereign is going to say, "Well, actually, no, this isn't right until I'm given that authority," and they claim it, and they
Sure.
move as if that is the case. Now, the trick there would be to make sure that the sages are acknowledged for being extraordinarily good sages. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
They need that reassurance that that is a brilliant idea. And I love the way that you've got numbers to back up what it is you're saying. And yeah, so they will be thinking in terms of history, in evidence, data, and conclusions based on data. So it's a past centered focus, and they will assume that the future looks like the past repeated. And this is where, as a sovereign, you come in and you give structure and order to that. You reaffirm all of that and say, well, hey, why don't we then build on that and do X, Y, and Z? However, guys, what I'm seeing here as a missing piece is that we actually need something as we need a new context within which all of this may prove to be amazing and true, but we need something to whether it's to go to market or to answer a solution or something. Let's for a moment just say this is all good and true as a basis. Now it's a case of what if. And I believe you've actually started using that phrase with some of these guys. Was that
Well,
right? After
I have. So just to add additional context, so I use it with my customers. So when I engage with my customers, I'm not surrounded by sages, so to speak. I'm there as the sage, trying to advise how best to approach certain things.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
And so sometimes they're looking for. I run into situations where they're all stuck in a rut, and I need to. They've had a lot of people come in and give them guidance. What they need is someone to come in with completely fresh thinking, and that's where that mystic would help me. On the other side of the coin, though, internally, I've got about 400 peers who are all trying to be thought leaders, all trying to be the popular idea makers, etc. So trying to get that control and everything in that environment is really difficult, if not impossible. Whereas in the customer's environment, it is. I mean, there I'm able to execute my sovereignty as well, because I'm able to say, right, well, let's take this team and do that, and I've already been given that accountability. So you're absolutely right. That accountability is there in a customer setting, but internally, in terms of driving my my career internally, etc., the challenge for me is how do I stand out from a bunch of people who don't want to play. They want to be the thought leaders. Any other ideas get shut down because they're not. It's a hostile environment in that sense, and
Right.
in ideation setting, it's everyone's idea is better than the next one, and you find that there are a few strong personalities within. Strange enough, there's 400 peers, and about 3 people within that pool are the go-tos. And
Okay.
and because they come up with these radically different ideas that either cause a lot of friction within the group, uh, which is in itself, what they say, there's no such thing as bad publicity. So even when they come up with things that get up a lot of people's noses, they're still getting the publicity.
Yeah.
They're just really playing the game really well in that sense.
Mm.
I'd like to know, how do I, amidst a peer of 400 people in that context, also elevate myself to the likes of those kinds of role players, if that makes sense.
So 30 seconds. What would happen if you don't?
Life would go on, and I would continue to add impact with my clients. I mean, in a way, I've come to that point because I've come to the realization that for the effort it's going to take in order to get to that level of elevation, what is the return going to be? And I started to realize that in that context, internal context, doesn't really matter. And I've sort of stepped back from it. But I think the challenge that I've had, Pat, is that when I joined this company, one of the criteria that I wanted to gain from it is being able to become a global leader,
Right.
because that would for me instill confidence to say that I can lead. So in a customer environment where I usually get blocked at a certain level, I'll know that I've got the tools to be able to break over that and carry on. I'll know that I can do leadership, so to speak. I think that's been the grub that I've had to deal with, is not being able to achieve that necessarily in the company that I'm at.
Yeah. So what is the currency that the sovereign uses to play their game?
I'm going to take a guess at that because nothing springs to mind, but I think that it would be, would it not be trying to make people feel important?
Okay, that's a really good point. So there's a sense in which it's almost like the people seek the blessing of the king or the queen. So that kind of reaffirming hand or voice or whatever you do to reaffirm them as individuals and for that value that they give is very, very important. The two things that I would introduce, though, to awaken from inside of you is twofold. First of all, it's vision. Every sovereign has a vision of a better future. The mystic does as well, but they go about it in two different ways.
Right.
And the sovereign tends to do it in a more linear, pragmatic sort of way. So they first lean on the sages and then the warriors in order to get this thing done initially. So that's because they are left brain characters, so they tend to gravitate with left brain characters. So
Makes sense, right?
so it has to be vision. It's still imagination in that sense, but it is based upon something a lot more reasonable, rational, logical,
Grounded.
linear,
Yeah.
grounded. So
Okay.
process towards progress is what they want, whereas the mystic is quite happy. It's all quite nebulous, and they're okay with that. They like progress, but they're happy with it. So, well, we don't really know. Let's just keep believing, and we'll all get there in the end, you know. and the sage goes, "Oh my life!"
Yeah.
but
You're saying that already, and I'm going, no, I couldn't do that. Yeah.
This is why you find it hard to call on the mystic. It's like you're telling me to call on the mystic. That clown. I mean, why would I?
Let me get my headband out and my guitar and
go,
get in character.
Whoa, come on, dudes. Let's wait for inspiration. And okay, so we can go there. I like the mystics, but they have their place.
Sure.
So vision is first, but then very, very often the sovereign comes in to establish principles. So actually they're establishing boundaries, vision, and then boundaries. And the boundaries are, so therefore, guys, this is how we will work and this is how we will not work. Yeah, this is what we will do and this is what we will not do. This is what is acceptable and this is what is not acceptable in terms of standards. So that's an absolute key. And yet the way in which to present those is to identify key principles that you expect yourself and your team to operate by. And
Right.
it's those principles that are very often the bridge to bring the sages on board. So, guys, love the ideas. What I think is really most important here is that is a principle that I think is key to steering the way that we're going here. And you're talking like the captain of a ship here. And even if the others are, their crew, but they see themselves as really senior crew and potentially could be running the ship themselves, when they hear that kind of clarion call, you are declaring truth as the sovereign. That sort of stuff tends to get people, it polarizes those people who go, hey, yeah, I could be in on that vision, or those people, and I want to be on his team, or those people who go,
fascinating. Yeah,
competitor. Do you see the point? So it's principles, and it's principles are the kind of the thing that you present with a vision. Now, whether the principles come first and the vision next, or whether it's the vision and then the principle, actually doesn't really matter. And you might just think about how that comes over with these people, but that's where you sit it. And as long as they then see their value, like, okay, so Fred, what you're doing here really does support that and goes absolutely in line with this key principle. But I would make sure you got several principles, but it's very much values driven. You say, what is most important? I believe what is most important is, yeah. And when you present that, then you can say, and that would enable us to, and you say, and you describe the vision of the better future. You say, that's what I would love to see happen. And I think we've got the team here to make that happen.
I actually think that would be really helpful, because if I sit back and I think about our collaboration channels and the dribble that gets shared very often, I think that would be very beneficial for me to be able to come back and say, great ideas, guys, but let's remember the following. If I come up with a list of those values to come back with, it allows me to take control of the audience in a sense, and establish that sage view very strongly, because I'm doing it in a more sovereign-based way. So I think that is actually going to be really helpful.
I think so. And I think the sage is strong with you, but in order for you to have the impact now, because you're in an environment of sages, your point of difference is you grasping and taking the sovereign forward so that they have direction, vision, and structure to see this to see this go through. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's absolutely key, I think, for you to make an impact there. And if that isn't accepted where you are, then actually you will need to find an environment where it is, because you can't escape that sovereign side of you. You can't ignore that. It'll always be a driver, and it will always be discontent. You will always be discontent if you're not answering that drive within you.
I think you've hit on a very important point, because I think it's even outside of this context, so my future is not dependent, thank goodness, on that context.
Yeah.
But what this has highlighted is, if I've got a list of guiding principles, generic enough to be used in any environment, it protects my sage personality, and allows me to enforce myself at any point, at any level, to always call back on when I see information coming through, or someone approach me on from a certain angle, or however it's done. I can always fall back on those principles to say, right, well, great point, or don't agree with that point based on the following. It gives me a strong framework to work within. I really like that thinking. I'm definitely going to play around with that.
Excellent. So I'm just seeing time now. We're going to round up in a few moments, but I think that it really is a key that you've grasped something really important there about the role of the sage and the sovereign in this situation. And the sovereign will always take the higher ground. So it's like, yeah, I can see the evidence. I can see what you're, analytically, this is where we're at as sages, and we've got these ideas here, and And even with the mystic coming out with fresh ideas, but the sovereign is the one that, okay, but what's most important? The sovereign will always raise that flag. The sovereign will always go back to those principles, and even keep the mystic in line with those principles. Like, we don't just shoot off on something that we've got no evidence for. We do need a degree of evidence. But as a sovereign, you just keep speaking, guys, what I believe is most important here is X. Or X, Y, and Z. And as long as we keep that in mind, I believe that the sage can play their role, the mystics can play their role, the lovers need to do their thing as well. So it's that holistic view, it's that elevated ground, it's the eagle eye view that the sovereign will bring in here. And it is a case of carving out your realm and then ruling and reigning in that realm, which, if it's done right, actually brings the best out of all those people, and they feel amazing because you've given them an environment to shine. There's always a little bit of tussle within the kingdom. There's always some people who would like to take the crown or carve out a bit more of their own niche or whatever. And yeah, you've got to handle those guys in the right way. But I think that there is a key here, at going back to those principles and speaking from a principles point of view, setting the scene, setting the boundaries with the team. Guys, I don't think it's acceptable to do this, and at some point you say, no, actually enough is a sovereign word, because it's highlighting a boundary. And so those are key things. I think the principles in the context of a new vision, one can lead to the other can lead to the one, doesn't matter. But then it's a case of, as you begin to declare that is what we will be doing. This is what they want the Queen's speech to say this. It's like, yes, we've done X, Y, and Z. That's wonderful. But where we're heading, and that's the key thing that has to be declared by the sovereign going forward. Yeah. So look, what I'm going to do, I'm going to send over to you the sovereign activation audio track, which I'm not sure you've heard about that, but I'm going to get that over to you for free at the end of this session, like I do with anybody. It's like, which one do you need the most of? Actually, it's already one of your strongest profile characters, but really to make the impact of where you need to go, listening to that will awaken more of that character. You'll hear the tonality, you'll hear the types of things the sovereign says, and you can literally adopt that in your daily life in order to make a greater impact in your meetings, in your thought leadership sessions at home. And it literally gets into your head and your way of thinking. It's not hypnosis. It's not it's not a meditation. It's an activation where you play that part. And as you strengthen those muscles, just like those are the funny exercises your personal trainer gives you, that will strengthen the sovereign character inside of you. Does that sound good?
Sounds fantastic. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I'll send that your way, and we'll take it from there. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's gone in some really interesting directions, and I'd love to hear how that goes forward with you and how you take that into the real world.
I will indeed share. Thank you very much, Pat.
Fabulous. Thanks, Richard.
So there you have an insider's view of one of these signature impact consultations, where we understand all 6 archetypes and how they're impacting somebody's life, and how a shift and a change there could seriously help them to move significantly further forward in their chosen field. These archetype profiles will enable you to zero in on the specific character traits that you need to develop or at least become aware of in order to move forward without hindrances, without feeling stuck. This is where we diagnose and discover the hidden code to your unique personal strengths, the next step to your path to purpose and to profit. So I really do encourage you now to book your session with me online. teamme.com/impact gives you the details and the link. So go there now, book your session with me, and we will have an amazing time of unpacking who you really are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and defining a path to go forward, as well as giving you some of the tools there and then that you can pick up and utilize to create your signature impact.